I'm Paul Haga. I'm chair of the executive board of the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law at Penn Law School. We are a nonpartisan, interdisciplinary institute dedicated to the preservation and promotion of the rule of law in 21st century warfare and national security. CERL draws from the study of law, philosophy, and ethics, and unites scholars, policymakers, and practitioners to probe critical issues through the lens of ethics and the rule of law. Our programs and products include 1- and 2-day programs like we had today. It includes book talks, it includes briefing papers, and our participation includes partnerships with Perry World House, think tanks like American Enterprise Institute, and the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and we've also partnered with GJAG and West Point, so we have a very strong military presence. I am introducing the introducer, my good friend Claire Finkelstein. She founded CERL 7 years ago and serves as its faculty director. She's the Algernon Biddle Professor of Law and Professor of Philosophy at Penn Law School. Claire's current research addresses national security law and policy with a focus on ethical and rule of law issues that arise in that arena. In 2019, she was named Senior Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. She also serves now as co-editor of CERL's Oxford University Press series in ethics, national security, and the rule of law. Claire.
Thank you so much, Paul. Just before we begin, I want to express my deepest gratitude to Paul Haga, who has been such a wonderful board chair for CERL. We started 7 years ago as a very, very small organization, and we have grown considerably. Of course, rule of law is all in the public eye and public consciousness these days. We very much hope we're contributing to that conversation. It's also been our very great honor and privilege to partner closely with the Army JAG Corps and with other sectors in the military. And it is my particular honor to welcome General Joseph Votel here today. General Votel is a retired 4-star general in the United States Army who was commander of the United States Central Command from March 2016 to March 2019. Before that, as a general officer, he served in the Pentagon as the director of the Army and Joint IED Defeat Task Force, and subsequently as the deputy director of the Joint IED Defeat Organization. He served as the deputy commanding general of operations in the 82nd Airborne Division during Operation Enduring Freedom, then as deputy commanding general, then commanding general of the Joint Special Operations Command, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We're absolutely delighted to welcome General Votel to Penn Law, and he'll be speaking to us about some reflections from his career related to the current topic today. So please join me in welcoming General Votel.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and I look forward to giving you a little bit of a warfighter's perspective on the challenge of new weaponry. But I want to begin my remarks here, and I do have some remarks up front that I'll try to give informally here by telling you a little bit of a story. And the story, if it had a title, it would be called The Rise of Drones, a Personal Experience. My personal experience with this. So let me take you back to October of 2001. I was a regimental commander. This, of course, is a month or so after 9/11, and we were getting ready for operations in Afghanistan. I had the opportunity to lead a parachute assault into an airstrip in southern Afghanistan. We made extraordinarily heavy reliance on national intelligence assets. We lacked real-time situational awareness and understanding what was happening on there. And we executed based on our previous experience in training. Unmanned systems were very sparse, hard to come by at this time, and the ones that we had were dedicated to higher priority missions on that particular event. With the resources we did have that fell into this kind of autonomous unmanned aerial thing were highly centralized and used for very unique operations. jump ahead a little bit to March of 2003. Again, I'm still the regimental commander. Now we find ourselves in Iraq, and I found myself with a mission to go in and recover a missing U.S. service member. So we put together a task force to do that. But for the first time, I had direct support of a predator, and it significantly changed the way that we looked at this operation, and it gave us a level of confidence and understanding that we didn't have a great appreciation for. Of course, at this time, we also were beginning the proliferation of small UAVs down in the unit level, and so it was not only me that was enjoying the benefit of that, but our troops at a lower level were as well. Again, stepping forward, 2004 to 2007, involved in the IED fight at that particular time, but I also spent a considerable amount of that time in Afghanistan. And what we began to see with drones during that period was much more deliberate targeting of the threats out there. Predator surveillance complemented by special intelligence and extensive detainee exploitation, really helping us regain the initiative, particularly in Iraq at this particular time. Again, I had the opportunity after that, from 2008 2010, to serve as Admiral McCraven's deputy at JSOC. And at this point, we are actually now seeing a very extensive proliferation of manned and unmanned systems. But we're also seeing an increased concern for civilian casualties as a result of this. And in national security circles, we're seeing a discussion of a CT strategy that is actually focused on CT strikes, really as a key feature of it. From 2011 to really 2016, during my time as the commander at JSOC and as the U.S. SOCOM commander, my experience here was very effective campaigns to begin to roll back al-Qaeda in places like Yemen and northeast Afghanistan. But again, growing concerns about civilian casualties, especially with discrimination and collateral effects. During that period, we had a very significant issue with use of American predators to target American citizens. Mr. alAwlaki, as you will recall, in Yemen here, a very significant ethical, legal discussion. Increasing integration and effectiveness between cutting-edge capabilities. Development of very specific tools that were designed to help us improve targeting, improve timing, improve precision, improve accuracy, improve our estimation and minimization of collateral effects. But also during this period, we began to see problems with some of our force. Some of you read articles in the paper here, or in journals about the moral implications of war from a distance. That is, operators out at bases in the United States who were orchestrating strikes and then left to go to their children's soccer games. And all the challenges. And one that I actually confronted significantly as the SOCOM commander. 2016, 2017, or 2019 as the CENTCOM commander. Again, a very effective campaign against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. This time executed almost completely in support of indigenous and local partners on the ground. Much more decentralized control of our resources, particularly these drones. We saw very heavy cyber integration to this. And actually very effective use of these capabilities key to operational maneuver. But yet less ability to assess collateral effects on the ground because we didn't have people there. We were relying on our remote eyeball, if you will. In 2017, 2018, I'd also point out that we also began to see the first serious employment of UAVs against U.S. troops and partner forces in a place like Iraq. We began to see small UAV and improvised missile attacks coming from Yemen against our Arab partners. We began to see longer range attacks against key Arab infrastructure. And we began to see more frequent and routine overflight of our resources in the Middle East, particularly in the Gulf in the Arabian Gulf by adversary UAVs, particularly Iranian UAVs. And of course, as we all just experienced here a couple weeks ago, we really have a yet unconfirmed entity, assessed as the Houthis and Iranians, conduct a very highly effective attack using UAVs and cruise missiles on the world's largest crude processing plant, effectively shutting down 50% of the production, causing oil prices go up, and I think as you read some of the literature, probably sustaining a long-term increase in the cost of gas prices at the pump. Admittedly, this is a rather incomplete and abbreviated and highly personalized story about a single innovative technology, that is drones, the use of these autonomous systems out there. But for me, I think it's a really great example that we should be studying today to understand the impacts of integrating new weaponry into our national security discussions. What we've done in the past can really help us navigate the future. From my experience, just the one that I've just related to you, I took away a number of observations, a number of them. Let me just share 3 of them. Technologies like drones can truly and positively impact our operations and strategy. I'm convinced we save lives, not just American lives, but lives on the ground. It can aid in increased precision and accuracy. But it also caused us to pay more attention to our methods and practices, and that just having that technology wasn't enough. When I was a JSOC man, we actually had a suite of tools that went along with that. We really, I think, we're very, very effective at that in both ways, being effective, but also minimizing our effects on this, on civilians and others in the area. Second big observation. Our learning curve is often slower than it should be when you introduce new cutting-edge technology capabilities in the inventory. And this is especially so when it comes to the integration and application of military ethics and the law of armed conflict. We were playing catch-up in this. We're not only at the tactical operational level, but at the national security level in terms of what the proper use and controls over these types of capabilities need to be. And then the third kind of big observation here out of this was the cost of the learning curve often affects our operations and indeed our strategy. So civilian casualties, collateral effects began to drive how we employed it and how we actually orchestrated our campaigns. As I mentioned, the targeting of U.S. systems or U.S. citizens as members of terrorist organizations significantly impacting on that. And then, of course, the challenges that this technology presented to the sovereign states that we are operating in. Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen. Admittedly, challenging states within themselves, but sovereign states nonetheless that were extraordinarily challenged by this technology and that we had to deal with. And it did affect our operations and our campaigns. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As your chairman talked about here, CERL is playing a key role in helping with these important discussions. And I think the idea of an organization like this being a leading voice in the country's conversation on this is extraordinarily important. I'm going to provide you a few other comments here, but I would at this point would just interdict a couple of cautionary notes for you. First and foremost, I'm an infantryman and I'm a ranger. So what that means is that I'm a practitioner. And I think about these things as a practitioner would do that. I'm not a historian, I'm not a technologist, and I'm certainly not a legal expert, but I certainly have a great appreciation for people that are and for the role that plays in what we're doing. Second of all, I am a victim of my own experience here. I am largely informed by my experiences in the CT fight and the last 3 commands that I've had at JSOC, SOCOM, and CENTCOM. And then third, I am retired. As Secretary Mattis often reminded retired officers or officers about to retire that you become a refugee from accountability. That what you say, you can't be held completely accountable for that. So I am mindful of that, but I'm also mindful of the fact that I am on a steady decline in my decreasing in relevant situational awareness on kind of the current situation here. So I'll just throw that out here. Nonetheless, this is a really important topic to take on today, especially when we look at things like the most recent version of the National Defense Strategy that really puts a focus on great power competition and what that means for our country, especially when we look at actors like China and what they are doing and their approaches to this similar the discussion we're having today, which is much different, not just from a practical standpoint of how they're investing in development, but really in terms of how they actually apply it. The big idea that I want to leave with you today, I think, and that I would want you to walk out of here with is that how we do things on the battlefield, how we do things in support of our national interests is as important or perhaps more important than the things that we actually do. No commander wants to win battles only to lose the fight, lose the war because we're perceived as doing things unethically or in violation of the law of armed conflict. And Claire, we were talking a little bit about this at lunch, and that is something, frankly, that I spent a lot of time talking with my leaders about the fact that, hey, there's not anything we can't consider, but there are some things we just are not going to do here. And we always have to understand the ramifications of our actions, and so I think that's the key point that I'd like to leave with you today. If you take one thing out of this, understanding the new weaponry, I've had an opportunity to sit through the last two panels. Incredibly interesting. I do have a number of. I didn't want to raise my hand, but I chose not to. I disciplined myself here because I knew I would have an opportunity to talk a little bit about it. But it was very, very interesting. I'm sorry that I missed the first one on AI and cybersecurity. Got a little bit of the convergence of biological and chemical weapons. I was very interested. These last two I thought were very, very interesting, particularly the ethics of biological enhancement and genetics. When I was the first Ranger Battalion Commander, I showed up in 1998. This, of course, was before the wars were screwing up the training program here, so we were really focused on high amount of readiness. I went down to the Ranger gym, and like in the first few days I was there, and we were very, very proud of this physical fitness facility that we had. A lot of young men down there lifting weights and getting big and doing all kinds of things you'd expect them to do. But off to the side, I noticed that we were selling performance enhancement products. EAS products. And I soon came to learn that the 1st Ranger Battalion, this little tiny Army organization of several hundred Rangers here, was the second largest user of EAS products in the state of Georgia, behind the University of Georgia. And I began to wonder, well, that's interesting, so maybe I ought to look into this. And I went down there and I kind of got in line, and I was in my PT gear, so I was a little bit anonymous, but there were a couple of young troops in front of me that were buying stuff, and one turned to the other and said, what does this stuff do? And the other guy says, I don't know. My squad leader says we need to have it. And at that point, I began to recognize this is a problem right here. And we ended up shutting it down. I was kind of a local villain there for a while, but it's a reminder. I think we got to understand exactly what we're doing, particularly in this area. As the commander of CENTCOM. In our forces that we had on the ground, both in Iraq and Syria, we came across huge stores of Captagon, which is this pill that ISIS leadership was giving to their fighters. What they told them was this will make them fight harder and better. And essentially what it did, though, was, of course, it was an amphetamine to keep them awake and alert. Very nefarious use of all of that. Out of this discussion that I saw, the promise of technology is really enticing. The promise of all these cutting edge things is really enticing. It creates the opportunity that we can take what is a really messy business, defending the country, going out there and taking action against our enemies, and we can make it better. We can protect ourselves better. We can be smarter about it. We can protect more civilians on the ground. I think that's a very noble pursuit, but it is also a very, very difficult pursuit to actually enable. So this discussion today, I think, was extraordinary. Listening to that, I want to talk just a little bit about how I look at some of these kind of capabilities. As a reminder, I'm a practitioner. And so I kind of have a tendency to think about these things in terms of what's evolutionary and what's revolutionary. Evolutionary means it's developing along a track that's gradual, incremental, and somewhat predictable. And revolutionary meaning that it's developing in a much more dramatic fashion. Significant changes in the approach. less predictable and more prone to leaps in capability and leaps in opportunity here. And I don't mean to characterize one as better than the other, or one is more ethical or less ethical than the other. That's not, it's just my way of thinking about these different capabilities. So as I kind of look at the areas that we've been talking about today, I would classify things like our maturing capabilities in cyber and space and advanced weaponry, particularly things like hypersonics, as evolutionary, meaning that we have organizations that are dealing with this. We have some technical regimes and protocols. We're producing specialists. There is some doctrine and concepts that come along with this or are emerging in this area. And there is a growing body, there's a body and a growing body of ethical and legal groundwork that can help us begin to address how we actually employ that. I would classify things like AI, machine learning, increasing autonomy, nanotechnology, advances in bioweapons as kind of being in the mid-ground here between evolutionary and revolutionary. And these are areas that we, in my estimation, we generally understand. And there may be some organization, certainly we've heard on, especially on the nanotechnology side, I mean, there's a number of books that have been written on this and had some very, very good discussion on this. There's some technical protocols, there's specialization, there's some thoughts about doctrine and concepts, but we haven't really fully, in my estimation, grasped what the end states of these capabilities are for us yet. And there are significant ethical and legal ramifications that require more effort to address and resolve. I would describe, in the kind of the revolutionary area, I would describe things like the convergence of these technologies and weaponry as something that is that falls into the revolutionary area, meaning that we are underinvested in development, research, understanding of these particular areas. So, you know, again, my example, nanotechnology and biological capabilities. That the combination of those two things is a real problem. I think when you start combining any of these things, we exponentially increase the complexity of this and what it means for us. I personally think big data and information manipulation is an area that I as a combatant commander, I was extraordinarily concerned about. And I think this is something that falls into this. I don't think we fully understand it. I don't know that we are invested as we need to be in understanding the impacts of publicly available information and what that does in the environments in which we are pursuing our national security interests. And I'm very, very concerned about that. I am concerned about the weaponization of human populations. We were talking at lunch. Some of you can remember back to the heartbreaking scenes in 2013, 2014 of people trying to escape this situation in Syria by getting on boats and going across the seas or the long refugee lines trying to get into Europe. This weaponization of human populations is a new form of weaponry we have to think about. It's one that I think about. You know, today as we sit here, there are 3.6 million refugees in the country of Turkey. There are Lebanon, the population of that country under normal circumstances would be about 1.5 million people. It's more than doubled with the refugees that they have. Jordan has taken almost 2 million refugees. These Lebanon and Jordan are not wealthy countries that can deal with this. Turkey can deal with this, perhaps. These countries can't. These populations, this presents a long-term problem for us. In Syria today, not only do we have thousands, single-digit thousands of fighters that have been captured and are being protected on the ground by our Syrian Defense Force partners, largely the Kurds, but we also have tens of thousands of family members, women and children, that are encamped there. These populations are being weaponized. They're being further radicalized. We are going to have to deal with this from a security standpoint down the line. So I would throw this in. I know it's not an area that you talked about today, but it's certainly an area that as a combatant commander I think about. I also think about these capabilities through the lens of application on the battlefield. And so I think there's kind of a series of, at least what I would kind of call meta questions that that I think military leaders and to some extent policy makers should be asking as we move forward in capability areas like this. First of these is, does the weapon or capability improve our ability to accomplish our weapon? Does it lead to increased situational awareness and situational understanding? Does it reduce the physical, mental, intellectual loads on our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and the leaders that are leading them? Does it contribute to better, faster information, enhanced decision making? You know, when I was the regimental commander and when I was a SOCOM commander, I saw two examples. You know, as a colonel, the Army was pursuing something we called the Land Warrior, which was designed to be a suit that we gave to people that enabled them to be more capable on the battlefield, and enhanced with information and all the capabilities, everything else they need to be to really be capable. As the SOCOM commander, my predecessor Bill McCraven and I were investing in a program we called TALOS, which was the Tactical Assault Light Operation. So it's kind of the Iron Man concept that you might have seen out there. How do you enhance this? This was a program that came about because we lost an operator going through the door on a hostage rescue, and we asked ourselves, can't we do better with this? Why can't we protect this guy going through the door? And that's how this program. And I'm disappointed to tell you that neither of those programs panned out in the way that we wanted them to be. Mostly because it didn't really improve. It couldn't be. The technology couldn't be brought to a point where it could really make things better for the folks on the ground. The second big meta question is, can it be integrated with other battlefield systems? Is the capability usable now? Can we sustain it? Are the troops employed that we are employing, are they trained to use it? Is there a conceptual design for its employment? Do we appreciate how this capability affects organizations, leaderships, and decision making? When I was leading the IED task force, which I think we'll hopefully get into a little bit more here, one of the technologies we were looking at was pre-detonation capability. You know, if we could put an array, if we could do something out there to project it out there, pre-detonation capability, that this might be an effective way to beat back these roadside bombs, and a lot of effort was done in that. Ultimately, however, as we looked at this, and particularly as we started talking to people on the ground, it became an unworkable solution for a variety of reasons, because we couldn't predict who was going to be around it when it was detonated, and the impact it would have not only on our soldiers but on civilians in the area. I think the third big meta question is how does it impact the underlying issues of the conflict? Can we expect the reaction by Congress, by the media, by the American public, and especially by our partners and the indigenous people in the countries that we are operating? Drones is a great example right here. We had a largely negative impact on that. We have to think through that issue. It doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it, but it means we have to consider that aspect. Fourth is, what's the opportunities for proliferation? Does our use of it make it okay for others to do this? Does our adversary have these capabilities? How will they employ it? You know, I think we've just seen an example of this here most recently with this strike in Saudi Arabia, where clearly a significant infrastructure, civilian infrastructure target attacked in this particular case. That certainly wasn't hopefully in the we model to them, but I think we have to understand the opportunities for proliferation. I think the last big meta question is what are our obligations under the law of armed conflict for these capabilities? What are the unique aspects of this that impact ROE? Is there a process to address the ethical law of armed conflict aspects? As I mentioned to you, we're often slow in recognizing those aspects. We certainly were with drones. We were certainly with a variety of things. I know one of the things that CERL has looked at before is the detention of our combatants, lawful combatants on the ground here, and the aspect of doing that and the impact that it has on how we treat them. You know, there's a big discussion in our country about whether terrorists are lawful combatants. it's kind of academic from my standpoint. We're dealing with them, and if we don't treat them with a level of that reflects our values and adheres to the law of armed conflict, we are on our own. We are off base in that particular thing. So we have to think about the impacts of that. So let me just close by talking about what I think challenges of the new weaponry will be going forward. And again, I am heavily influenced by my experience. I am very clearly a victim of my own experience. But I do think people like me, people in uniform, charged with implementing strategies and applying the operational art and tactics will contend with a variety will contend with some, at least 3 key aspects of leadership and operations as we either try to embrace and leverage this technology, or we try to manage and control it, or we try to limit or neutralize it. We're going to contend with some things. I think the first of these is what I kind of characterize as the commander-decision interface. And first and foremost among that is the kill chain. I am concerned with the blurring, as we look at some of these technologies, particularly some that have been talked about today, of blurring the point at which artificial intelligence, machine learning, these things do our thinking and help us with decision making, and where a human actually steps in and says, yes, do this, take this action now. I direct you to take this action. I think this is something that is very, very keen. Obviously, in our nuclear enterprise, this is absolutely essential here. That we have that in there. Decision making needs to, in my estimation, needs to remain in the hands of a human on this, and we have to look at that. We have to look at the role of human and moral judgment. We had a very good discussion, particularly when we were talking about the ethics of biological enhancement and genetics here. Humans making decisions, assessing facts, having emotions on the battlefield, feeling instincts is an important part of how people like me make decisions out there, and how people below us do that. And I think we have to look at how we do that. And then I think in this area, this commander decision interface, I'm concerned about preserving the importance of what I call leader command and feedback loops. And when I say feedback loops, I'm not talking about connecting the neurons up here. I'm talking about connecting layers of leadership and moving information back and forth. The most successful operations that I've been involved in have been operations when we have been able to rapidly move information between levels of command, above and below me, and to do that in real time so people understood, people could be aware of what was happening, and we could align action against an adversary. So this first challenge there is what I kind of call commander decision interface. The second area where I think we will be challenged with this is in partner and coalition warfighting. We already run the risk of being technologically superior to many of our partners. Our fighters, aircraft that we have out there, a variety of capabilities, the technology that we have really sets us apart from many of those that we prefer to be our partners on the battlefield. And we have to think through the impact of that, particularly as we look at these new technologies. Do we share? And if we don't share, do we assume the responsibility to protect others because we won't share with these kind of capabilities out there? We have to think through this. We have to think through the ability of our partners to, if we do share, to keep pace and to remain interoperable with us as we move forward. And I think that, as a guy who's a former CENTCOM commander and who was coalition warfare was absolutely essential to what we're doing, I think this has to be looked at. And then, of course, the final area is the final area where we'll be challenged, I think, is in the military ethics and the law of armed conflict, of thinking through the ramifications of that. The regulation, what are the known implications of the technology? And what would our competitors do with this if they had it? How can we assess proportionality and discrimination with these capabilities? How do we address other things like privacy, individual rights that come along with some of these aspects? So I think these 3 areas: decision-making interface, partnerships and coalition warfare, and then getting ahead of the curve here and looking at the ethics and LOAC implications of this, I think are very, very important. Let me just wrap up here. as I kind of mentioned up front, how we do things is as important and perhaps more important than the things that we do. And it's my observation that senior military leaders, particularly in the United States and when many of our closest partners, think a lot about this particular topic. And we spend a lot of time talking about things like rules of engagement and operating principles and decision-making authorities and approvals and where those lie in all of our processes. But we're also focused on mission accomplishment within the law of armed conflict. And we understand that it often takes a longer time to assess the ethical and legal ramifications of these groundbreaking technologies we have out there. And we have to be part of the solution and part of the discussion that moves forward. To that end, CERL's efforts are extraordinarily important in increasing, in this increasingly complex and technological world, to actually have a discussion, an intellectual discussion on this, and you're playing a very key role. More broadly, the United States, in my estimation, needs to play the lead role in this as we address these capabilities out there. Only by doing that can we help chart a path that looks for the ethical employment of these capabilities in support of our national interests. I'm very glad to be here today. I look forward to the questions, and I look forward to your questions here as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was an absolutely fascinating overview of many of the thoughts that you've had as you've gone through your long and rich and detailed career. I was particularly struck by the arc that you trace from the rise of UAVs and how it immediately gave us a kind of advantage in one area, but you mentioned sort of quickly and passingly a disadvantage in another, which is we lost the benefit of intel on the ground. And I want to ask you a lot of other things about that description, but can you for a moment just address that trade-off?
Yeah, so there is a belief that that we can do things at distance and be effective and striking that. But I think what as I look at the intelligence disciplines out there, that frankly ISR is great. As a CENTCOM commander, I had 92% of the resources in the Department of Defense, and I constantly bitched about having more. And you just do that. But frankly, the most important capability, intelligence capability out there for us actually is human intelligence. And it is understanding, it's getting a grasp for what people understand on the ground and how things actually are on the ground. We can see things, we can make very good assessments. We got very good. We had analysts that could watch people on the ground and could begin by their gait, by how they were treated by others around them, could begin to make assessments about what we were looking at on the ground. But yet you don't always have that. One of the challenges we frankly faced in Syria is while we did have people on the ground, we didn't have huge numbers, and we certainly weren't like we were in Iraq in the 2003 to 2011. We had very difficult challenges assessing the impacts on the ground of some of our operations, strikes. And the impact that it had on collateral. We could see where damage was taking place, but we couldn't get out and investigate that. So I think there are some limitations to this that we have to recognize. There isn't one thing that there isn't a Manhattan Project out here, if you will, that solves the problem. It's a combination of a variety of things, and that's what commanders are trying to do out there. They're trying to bring lots of capabilities together that can complement each other to give you the best picture, the best understanding of what's happening.
So, General, how do you stack up the intel issues as against the increase in precision of remote technologies? At least in theory, that's one of the things that's always argued, which is that drones can be more precise. We hope they get more precise still. But an argument is very often made, look, this will reduce collateral damage. How effective are we at reducing collateral damage using precision technologies if we don't have the intel from up close.
Yeah, I think we're doing as good of a job as we can be in this particular area. Of course, this is an area where we've learned a lot about this. But one of the challenges that I faced this as a JSOC commander when we're doing a number of strikes here, is we have to protect against things like confirmation bias. What we're looking on ground and making an assessment and then really believing that that's what it is. So it really is this ability to combine other things and understand what's happening there that really gives us the best opportunity to reduce the chances for civilian casualties and collateral effects. I also think it's important that we get decision making at the right level. There was a tendency that when in the beginning of this, and to some extent it still exists today for certain missions, is to centralize the decision making on this, to keep it at a high level, because there is a belief that you can manage risk and you can manage that decision making at a high level, and that there'll be more careful look on it. That there may be a fallacy into that, because oftentimes it is our commanders at the lower level that have the better situational awareness, are much more connected to what is happening out there than somebody sitting in Tampa or LUD or someplace else that is looking at it through the lens, through this, and trying to pull things together. So I think a key part of it is getting decision making at the right level with our leaders.
And having the right allies on the ground.
And having the right allies on the ground.
Right. So another question that I had was, in the beginning of UAVs, you described this huge benefit as compared with prior operations, and really a reduction in risk for our forces. But then you describe UAVs on the other side, and attacks on our forces and on our Arab partners and allies. Once you are in a kind of arms race around unmanned vehicles, do we still retain as much of an advantage from having them, or are we just sort of back to the beginning and we've leveled out?
I think we do. I think we do, because kind of in the Western way of doing this and the way that we did this is that our drone technology became much more integrated with other things we were doing. So the impacts that we were able to create on the ground are more sustainable. They are longer lasting. They have a bigger impact on our adversaries out there. What we were seeing with initially kind of these quadcopter kind of things coming over, dropping a bomb or crashing into something, was something that was much more localized, and it certainly got our attention. We definitely paid attention to it. We went back to the industrial base and tried to figure out how we could bring these things down in a variety of different ways. But the impact of that, up until most recently here, on this most recent strike, we hadn't really seen something that really was a game changer on the ground. I think what we just saw in Saudi Arabia, in my estimation, is a game changer.
That's really interesting.
I mean, where now this has 50% of production, and at that facility shut down. Oil prices go up 20%. Now sustained, a sustained increase in gas prices at the pump. That's an impact.
And you're saying it's a game changer because it's a new kind of attack.
Yeah, it's a new kind of attack.
Right, something that we haven't dealt with before.
We haven't necessarily dealt with that before.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now let's talk briefly about the case of Anwar alAwlaki, and I just, since you mentioned a case that in fact CERL has had a lot of writing on and conferences on and so on. I'm really interested in your description of the kind of moral implications and moral costs of using drones, and several times you emphasized the fact that he was an American citizen, and you also emphasized the sort of public outcry and the public upset, you seem to be suggesting, around use of remote technologies to take out an American citizen. Yeah. And yet, I take it with Osama bin Laden, for example, where the killing was boots on the ground. in Pakistan. Should we feel differently about those cases?
I don't know. I don't think, I personally don't, and I'm not, and frankly, I don't have no love lost here for Mr. alAwlaki and the things that he was perpetrating on our country and what he was attempting to do. But I think it certainly raised a very pertinent issue here about how we address our own countrymen that have fallen into this category of terrorists that for which we have developed technologies and approaches and other things towards that, and it raised I think a very significant question if that's the is that the proper use of that, and given the type of country we are, with the values, with the rights and other things we have, is this the right approach? That certainly was a very heavy discussion in the policy realm. Ultimately, as we know, they came to the decision that yes, this is, in this particular case it is, but I think it posed, in my estimation, a pretty interesting and pertinent question to that. The raids on somebody like Osama bin Laden, I mean, there were civilians in the area. It wasn't a drone strike. There was people on the ground. Personally, I think my view was, if you could put people on the ground, you had a much greater chance of controlling the outcome, not only from a mission standpoint, making sure you accomplish the mission, because you actually had people on the ground thinking, but you also could better address things like collateral effects, civilian casualties, these types of things that I think were very, very, very important.
When I teach about this, I teach my students, and now I'm wondering if you're going to disagree with what I teach. I teach my students that it doesn't matter whether you take someone out by drone or in person. The sovereignty issues are still the same, and you mentioned sovereignty as a concern. Yet I think the Obama administration sort of regarded using a drone as not so much of a violation of sovereignty, not requiring the same permission and collaboration from our allies.
Well,
Did I have it right, or did they have it right?
no, I think that probably is right. But as time went on, it became more of an issue, I think, and it was something we had to pay more and more attention to. In the countries that I cited to you here, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, at specific times in each of those countries, either in Iraq, the last time we were there, or the most recent time we were there, we had very serious discussions all the way up to the Prime Minister level about the strikes we were doing, and we had to get procedures in place that made sure they understood what we were doing, particularly with kind of precision CT strikes. And if there were potential implications for collateral damage or civilian, that certainly became the case. This became a pretty big issue with President Hadi in Yemen because of the tribal pressures that he was dealing with at a time when he was trying to pull the country together. So I think my point is, and again, I would agree with you, it doesn't really matter whether it's a drone or whether it's people on the ground. The impact is the same. I think you're always trying to minimize the risk to mission accomplishment, the risk to creating collateral effects out there. But I think we have to recognize that these capabilities don't absolve us of a responsibility to be cognizant of things like sovereignty. And to recognize that, and to make sure there are processes and procedures in place that address that.
And you might remember that Obama gave a speech, I think it was in 2013, at the National Defense University, in which he said, we need a legal framework for targeted killings. And I thought, gee, you've been president since 2009, and now we need a legal framework for targeted killings. Aren't you coming to this a little late? But I think what you're describing is a kind of lack of certainty and lack of clarity around the legal and moral issues surrounding targeted killing that was
I think that's exactly what it is.
Damaging to us.
And I think the Obama administration struggled mightily with this, and it certainly wasn't for lack of focusing on it. There was a lot of discussion and debate about this, and I think the president was very keen to make sure that we were on a solid base with how we were approaching it, because that capability was becoming more prominent, and it was becoming more effective to our national security interests.
I don't want to depress you with this story, but I'll tell a brief one and then we'll move on. At the time I was doing an ethics briefing for some special ops forces, a combined British and American group, and I said, well, what's your current approach to capture versus kill? And they said, well, you know, in order to do a capture mission, it takes a lot of sign-offs, and we really have to have good evidence so we know the case will hold up at home. And I said, so you mean if you don't have good evidence, you kill? And if you do have good evidence, then you capture? I said, well, yeah, that's kind of funny, isn't it? So it made me realize there's total confusion, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're on the cusp of having processes that made it easier to target somebody with a drone than it did to go and actually put forces at risk and go in and try to capture them on the ground.
Right, exactly.
And, you know, this is again, I'm not saying that to take a poke at anybody. I think it just highlights the complexity of this environment in which we are operating, and how, you know, the desire to look for a solution would help us through this.
Yeah, so another thing you said about this is that our learning curve has been too slow around the introduction of new technologies. And you especially sort of emphasized the moral learning curve. Could you say a little bit more about that, and how can we speed up our moral learning curve?
Well, to answer the second part of your question, I think we have to look at examples like the introduction of drones into our kind of our military approach to what we're doing, particularly on CTM. We need to study this, and we need to understand it, and we need to understand how we made decisions and how we changed our approach over time. I think that's why I was advocating, is that it's a very useful model to look at that can help us think through other technologies and how we might, other capabilities, other new weaponry, and how we might approach it. So I think that's a key aspect. I'm trying to remember the first part of your question.
Well, and just sort of, what is that moral learning curve consist in? I think you're saying it consists in greater moral clarity, that framework that we were talking about. But we need to find a way to integrate that moral awareness and moving up a learning curve as new technologies are brought on board. And it's not clear how you.
I think there's a bias when you bring new technology on, that you are looking at it through the lens of how can this help me? How can this make it better for what I'm trying to do militarily? Right. And I think that has a tendency to get in the front seat, and then and I don't want to say this to think that people are not thinking about this or are doing things absent-mindedly, and they're not thinking about the ethical and law of arms. They are, but the primary thing that people are looking at is how can this help me? How can this potentially help save my own soldiers' lives, make me more effective in accomplishing the mission here? And they're not immediately focused on that. I'm not sure in 2001, 2002, 2003, when we were first making use of this, that we envisioned at some point an orchestrated campaign in the country of Yemen against Al-Qaeda. This would become our principal approach. I don't think we had envisioned that yet. And so, I think you have to look at examples of this. You have to use them as models in terms of how you think through this.
Now, let's talk about another subject, which is this issue of weaponization of civilian populations. That is when I first heard you talk about that, I had a kind of eureka moment. You put a frame around so much of what we've seen and really helped me to understand that better. I think, if I understand you, you're talking about weaponizing civilian populations in more than one sense. Both they become so heavily armed, right? And that was, of course, the fight against the caliphate and ISIS and so on. But also the movement of refugees itself is like a weaponization of civilian populations. Is that the sort of what
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think we now see we have pockets here in Syria where we've got family members that don't have passports. It's uncertain where they came from, or where they're going to go back to. They've got children. There's no government accountability for these people, and they are just there, and it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a generational problem that we're going to have to deal with. That's one aspect. I mean, as they do this, this is germinating ISIS 2.0. It's the next version of this. They are as radicalized as certainly as the fighters are in some cases. So that's part of it. And the other piece is what you said. I mean, I think what we saw was to some extent certainly the situation had been made bad by ISIS, but what we actually saw was the Syrian regime with the support of Russia and others going after populations and creating situations that were driving people to the north, driving people out of the country of Syria, and created a very, very significant problem and challenge not only for the countries around them, but certainly for Western Europe. And now you have 3.6 million refugees in the country of Turkey. Where do they go? Is the right thing to create a safe zone in what is normally considered a traditional Kurdish area and move all these people down there? What are the ethics of that?
So you're almost saying that creating vast refugee populations is itself a weapon.
I think it is.
I
believe that it is.
And you think it's intentionally done by
I certainly think that it was. Whether it was intentionally or whether it was not completely by design, it has created this effect that you now have populations that are displaced from where they come from, and can be used for political leverage or security leverage or other things like this, and then we have to be thinking about this.
So what obligations would you say, just to speculate on this, if you have any views on it, did those countries who have been involved in the war acquire for dealing with these civilian populations, with these enormous number of refugees?
Well, this is, I think, a problem that's not necessarily going to be resolved by any one country or maybe even the United States. I think this requires an international approach here for how this gets done. So I think organizations like the United Nations have to step up and have to be part of this, and we have to begin to recognize the problem, and then we need to look at getting protocols and processes in place that look to get people back to their homes. Obviously in some of these situations it's not going to happen until there's probably nothing is going to happen in Syria until we begin to address the political situation in that country and what it is next for this to happen. But that's got to take place, and so there has to be a concerted international effort to look at this.
And what it also suggests, we talked about at lunch about the pullout of troops from Syria, is the continuing obligation to ensure the order and safety and return to civilian government, effective civilian government, once we have been at war in an area. That's an enormous cost of war. Us.
No, I think this is, the decision to go to war, the decision to deploy troops is not one that should be made very lightly. And when you step into that, you have to be prepared to follow it through with this. And so we shouldn't be surprised that we need to continue to keep U.S. troops on the ground in a place like Syria to protect our interests. To prevent the resurgence of ISIS here, to work with our partners to do that, to keep that area that we expended national treasure on, and that our partners, 11,000 Syrian Democratic Force soldiers killed and wounded during that campaign. To make that sacrifice count, keep it stabilized so it can become a platform for how we get to the next step, which is the ultimate political resolution of this. So
let's go back now, and this is a topic that you touched on very briefly, but we didn't have a chance to talk about, to the IED situation. And you were the leader in 2003, all the way back then, of a group that was looking at how to protect our troops from IEDs. and that grew significantly and now has become a sort of major organized effort called JODO, right? JIDO. So this is a really interesting case, right? Because these are low technology devices that pose an increasing risk to our troops. And you think, all the high technology and the fancy dangers that our troops face and the fancy technology that we deploy against those dangers. But here are utterly simple, improvised explosive devices that we were kind of, at least at first helpless against. How do we think about that relative to the emergence of more complex technologies?
I think I think you're exactly right on this. I think we were really unprepared for what we faced there. As as you looked across the force, even our explosive ordnance disposal (EOD) forces, and particularly in the Army, were woefully manned and equipped to deal with this kind of threat. I mean, we just didn't have robots. We didn't have the cutting edge technology that needed to kind of address this. The basic organization that goes along with that. So we were really poorly impacted with this. And frankly, there's no magic to the fact that I got selected to do that. I literally was in a meeting on a Saturday morning when somebody turned around and said, "You're bingo, you're it. Organize this effort right here." And it had no training, no knowledge of how we might try to address that, but we had to start doing it. In the beginning, there is a belief, largely because of the hope of technology, this hope that there's something out there that we could find something. I mentioned, I used the phrase Manhattan Project. That actually came up. There was a belief that, hey, if we just figure out the right box, the right device for this thing, it'll solve this whole deal. And there was an element of our leadership that really believed that. We expended a lot of time and effort looking at a whole bunch of different things to do that. But what we ultimately came down to in addressing these types of threats was that you really had to take kind of a three-pronged approach. There had to be technology. We had to protect ourselves better. We had to get after something that could defeat this. From a technology standpoint. Second of all, we had to make sure that our troops were trained to operate in this environment. There was a whole training aspect that went along with making sure that people, how they conducted convoys, how they lowered their vulnerability to these things, how they identified this, how they addressed this, how they operated in this explosive, hazard-laden environment that we found ourselves in. So training was the next aspect of this. And then the third aspect was targeting, going after those that were doing this. And it was only until it took until bringing all of those into balance, technology, training, targeting, that we really began to have an impact against that particular threat. And that was a real challenge to do that, because there was our confidence in that there was a technology, that there was some tool, that there was something out there that was great. And we went through a whole variety of things. I can remember, and some of them didn't make a lot of sense. I can remember one, a really interesting one that somebody came and talked to me about, he was using bees to, because they have some kind of organic capability that draws them to explosives. Some of you might understand this. I don't. I'll buy into it. And so I had people come to me for weeks, months, about using bees to do this. And my response was, that sounds great. I'm not sure how we package that, how we give that to a platoon leader on the ground, and he deploys his bees.
Here are your bees, sir.
So, it really was, it gets back down to this thing of the relevance to what you're dealing with here. With this, and that we got better at protecting ourselves. We got better at jamming these things, and those were pretty key technology. And then we developed better ways of clearing routes and getting the right engineer equipment out there, the right stuff for our EOD operators out there, and then we began to kind of turn it. And then when complemented by well-trained troops that understood what they were doing, and then a deliberate effort to go after the people that were trying to do this, then we really had something.
But it shows it's not a single technological
No, it's not.
fix,
No,
right?
it's-
It's a
it's-
combination
it's
of efforts,
that's
many
right.
of which are human.
Exactly.
And then, in effect, if you think about fighting a war, an asymmetric war against an armed civilian population, which in effect they were, ISIS was, they are able to gain some kind of parity in extraordinary ways by using low-tech weapons, improvised weapons, and things that we are not prepared to deal with when we're thinking about our superior capabilities. How much is, sort of technology in the long haul going to help us against majorly armed civilian populations?
I mean, I think that there certainly is a role for it, and we have to look at it. But your point is the defense is almost always more expensive than the offense in these cases, and that's just kind of the way that it is. I mean, I'm thinking back to, quadcopters coming out of Yemen going into other countries in the Arabian Peninsula, and then some larger UAVs doing the same thing, and they were basically shooting them down with Patriot missiles. Now look at the cost of that. $1 million for a Patriot missile for something that probably maybe costs $1,200. So this is the challenge I think that we have there, and that's why I think we can't put all our eggs in the technology basket, if you will, and you have to look at a kind of a multi-accessed approach to these things we're doing. We have to go after the people that are doing this. We have to make sure we operate in the environment. We know how to operate in the environment effectively, and then we have to have the right tools. But it's going to be expensive if we allow people to get asymmetric tools, and then we try to do it. The UAVs over our own troops in Iraq was a real challenge to try to figure that out. Ultimately, the approach we took was all comers. If you got something, let us see it. Let's get it into the hands of the troops. And where we really made a big difference was when we got it into the hands of the troops, they would look at it and say, nope, this is crap, get it out of here. Or they would say, if I just take this and I make some tweaks to it, now I got something. And so, we have to shorten this link between the technologists who got the great ideas and the people that are actually applying it, and bring that together, and kind of rapidly prototype our way through that to get to something that's very effective from a technology standpoint.
Well, that's terrific. Let's get members of our audience in. Do we have roving mics going around? So just leave your hands up, and I think we probably have 2 microphones. We'll get 2 of them out there so we can move quickly. Mitt? So just get him a microphone. Can we get Derek a microphone as well over here? Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, General. So one aspect of military operations that many people seem to feel is increasingly going to be significant is...
I'm sorry, is what?
Is increasingly going to be significant is more demanding expectations with respect to civilian casualties, right? That for a variety of reasons, there's an expectation now, not simply that at least advanced Western militaries will not simply ensure that civilian casualties are not excessive, which is the IHL, Law of Armed Conflict standard, but that they're as low as possible. And Sarah Sewell has written about this in a report for the Air Force, where she says, look, like it or not, for better or for worse, this is coming to be the public expectation with respect to the legitimacy of the use of force for advanced militaries and technologically sophisticated countries. So I guess a 2-part question. One is, do you agree that that's the case? Do you see that that is in fact affecting decision making? We know it did with respect to, say, General McChrystal's tactical directive in Afghanistan, And it obviously makes sense in counterinsurgency, but the sense is that, no, this actually extends beyond that. And second, if so, what are the various components that are required to do that? You know, some have suggested, well, you can't just focus on the precision of the platform. You have to look at a much broader context. So I'd really welcome your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's a great question, and I would agree with you. I think we have created an expectation that we can do this very cleanly, and you know, get the bad guys but not hurt any of the good guys when we do this. And so I think there is a very, very great expectation out there for that. And I think, unfortunately, I think people, some in the decision chain, and certainly probably the broader American public, doesn't have a feel, I think, for how complex the environment is that our people actually operate in here, and that the enemy actually does have a vote in this. And can always react to this. And so it's an extraordinarily complex piece. I think the most important thing that I found, particularly as the JSOC commander and as a combatant commander, was in the best military advice that we try to provide to our civilian leaders is to make sure that we do our very best job of first of all highlighting the options out there of things we can do, making a recommendation on what is most prudent militarily for the military mission, and then making sure that we explain the ramifications of that as carefully as we can, not only in terms of resources, but in terms of risk and effect on the ground of the things that we're doing. And I think that becomes, very important. And this is why this idea of humans in the chain becomes so important. This is what I kind of refer to as these feedback loops where people are talking back and forth. When we did, in April of 17, when the Syrians used chemicals against their own people, and the president made the decision that we would not abide by that, and we did a strike to doing that. And we went through a very rapid, but I think a very good process to identify not just the targets, but to make sure that we selected targets that absolutely minimize the opportunities for that, and where we thought there could be some things that we were very, very clear with the civilian leadership on where we thought these potential risks were. And so, that's kind of a long way of just telling you that I think this is about communication. I think it's about making sure there is a connection between people that are ordering these things and the people that are actually executing these things, whether it goes all the way to the president or whether it comes to me or goes to somebody below me. I think you have to have that in place. And that's that's how I think we tried to think about this. But there's no doubt there is an expectation that we will be able to do this as a very, very clean manner.
And I take it you wouldn't be very happy if that communication was between one autonomous system and another autonomous system where no human is in the loop.
I think that's a real challenge.
Derek.
That actually segues perfectly into my question. I'd like to pursue this idea you've discussed a couple times about keeping meaningful human control at all levels of operations. In the first panel, we discussed how right now AI is being used sort of in the periphery of operations at the levels of intelligence gathering and categorization, perhaps at the levels of executing and manipulating strikes, but not so much in the central levels of tactics, strategy, and even policy. Now, you could imagine enthusiasts saying, well, let's incorporate AI into all of these levels, at the very least as a kind of an augmentation for human capacities in tactics, in strategy, in policy making. And as someone who has operated at all levels of command, I want to ask you what your attitude is about that kind of enthusiasm, if you think that there are certain areas of operations where especially AI should be introduced, and other areas where you would be very, very skeptical about an enthusiastic young philosopher suggesting we should introduce AI into these areas.
I don't know that I can necessarily limit it down to any particular areas. I think the promise of artificial intelligence is pretty powerful. I think for me, as I kind of think about this, again, I'm not the duty expert here on all the science behind all of it that takes place, but I think what has to happen is where that ends has to be at a place that is useful and meaningful to the people that are actually going to make decisions. One of the things that, one of the developments that I've watched over the last couple of years, particularly during the ISIS fight, has been the inclusion of data scientists into our formations and into our organizations out here to help us better understand what we were seeing, what we were looking out here. I think this is incredibly valuable. I think this really enhances the ability for people to make good decisions and try to do that. But I think that all has to come into some kind of funnel, if you will. I'm not being as articulate here as it probably should be, but it has to come to a point where it is actually usable to the person who is going to actually make a decision. There was a really interesting article, I think I read it today or yesterday. It was about the growing cyber capabilities over at Cyber Command. And they basically described this picture of a joint operations center somewhere over at Fort Meade here, and commander in the back telling people, fire, 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 fire your digits, that kind of stuff. I mean, to me, that made a lot of sense. That's a human in the loop with what's happening right there. And I can't describe exactly how everything kind of fed up to that person, but I think these things we've got to look at how they terminate in a way that is useful to the people that are going to make the decision. I think we're going to be really challenged. I mean, I think things like, hypersonic weapons. China shooting hypersonic weapons and us and the ability to shoot back and engage those things. There may be a situation there where in a certain algorithm, a certain situation where then you just go. I mean, kind of like a phalanx system on one of our ships out there. It detects the threat and it shoots. CRAM systems we have in place on some of our bases in the Middle East. It sees a mortar coming in, it shoots. It's there's humans that can intercept it, and they're in the process there. But that I think is good examples of how we really do shorten the thing and take advantage of what these systems are telling us.
We have another question. Yeah.
General, thank you for your years of public service and for being with us today. In the panel on bioenhancements and genetics, Professor Sutton mentioned that China has shown much more willingness to experiment with genetics, and indeed, earlier this year, did experiment with humans. It made me wonder about how our defense community at the high command and policy setting level changes its ethical considerations and decision-making processes in the face of other countries that are willing to develop dangerous weapons, potentially dual-use technologies.
Yeah, I think we have to really be careful about changing something that we would think of as an ethical standard in terms of that. Just because somebody else is doing that. This is why I think there needs to be high level discussions on these types of technologies, and we ought to, the United States and other countries that are aligned with us ought to be part of these discussions to drive kind of the standards for these types of things. So I'm uneasy with us getting on a process that begins to say, well, they're doing it, so it's okay for us. I think, again, and I'm a pragmatist and I'm a practitioner, so I try to think very simply about this. In 2003, 2004, we got off the map at Abu Ghraib. But because we had values, because we had a baseline, we could come back to that. And we could address it in an appropriate manner. So I'm uncomfortable with a floating ethical standard out there at this point because I just don't know where we go, and I don't know how we kind of get back to home base on it with that. And I'm really nervous. I'm really nervous about that.
Another over here. Yes.
Sir, as a fellow infantryman myself, I would like to talk about the increased use of technology and its incorporation from the tactical to all the way to the strategic level, and the concerns on its impact as far as devaluing human life. As said, technology not only physically but also psychologically detaches the warfighter from the battle. And is there any growing concern for that as well?
I think there absolutely is, and you know, I think one of the things we tried to remind ourselves of as we did strikes was that these are serious matters, and you have to. I mean, we are making the decision to take a human life, and it has to be approached in that mindset and that understanding with that. And I think when you this is the role of commanders, I think, is when you begin to see that people are beginning to lose that detachment, then I think there's a problem. I think I'm concerned with our service members that have deployed a lot and are now going back to places like Afghanistan for the 7th, 8th, 9th time. And they begin to lose, I think, some of the edge, some of the focus that goes along with making sure they understand the significance of what they're doing and the ramifications of the decisions they're making. You know, some of the organizations, I think, very smartly began to tell people, hey, you're going to sit this one out, you're staying back, you're going to do this, you may have experienced this in some of the organizations you're a part of. But I think we really have to look. I am very, very concerned about that. Being at war and having people that have been deployed multiple times in these situations, I think we have to pay attention to people losing their human qualities, or humanity, if you will, even against these, in some cases, some of these animals that we're dealing with, ISIS. We have to really be on the guard for that. So I am concerned about that at all particular levels. I think it's a little easier to manage the higher levels. It's more challenging, I think, at the lower levels.
And one of the things that you mentioned, just to follow up on that, is the importance of our maintaining our integrity, even if our enemy is using that integrity against us, or even if the enemy is exploiting our willingness to, our insistence on being law-abiding and sticking to the law of armed conflict. And one of the issues, of course, that I think you're raising here is the relationship of the moral fiber and integrity of what you're doing and the impact on the warfighter of feeling like he's lost his ethical moorings.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. I mean, during the panel on enhancements and other things like that, I don't recall who the gentleman was sitting right over on the right-hand side here, talking about the programs in place at the service academies that are trying to create this. I mean, you're actually addressing character in people, and trying to imbue them with some qualities and some values that are going to help them make better decisions and make good decisions down the line. And it's not become rote or automatic in that, but that they go through a decision-making process in terms of things that they are doing, and they understand what their responsibilities are with respect to that. I think this is extraordinarily important. I mean, I think that's why, at West Point they teach philosophy. So you begin to go through a little bit of the moral reasoning for the things that you're doing.
I've always been impressed by how little our enemies pay financially for their weapons. For example, the IEDs are relatively cheap. Probably the 9/11 attacks cost us $100,000 to organize and cost us billions of dollars. Is there anywhere in our military where we have people thinking up cheap tactics to attack our enemies?
I certainly think there are, and I think one of the organizations that grew out of the IED effort was an organization known as the Asymmetric Warfare Group. It's an Army organization, and its sole focus was how you deal with these asymmetric, improvised threats that we were dealing with out there. And what I think we learned with that was that while there is some technology and things out there, a lot of it had to do with how organizations operated, how leaders led, how they assess problems on the ground, how they work their way through problems. You know, one of the key things in the soft community that we really focused on in our organizations was training our operators to kind of be the ultimate problem solver. That when they came on things, they used the most powerful tool they had, their brains, to kind of think through this problem. And so I think one of the best ways of doing this is through these types of programs that really get people thinking about how they work themselves out of these solutions. I don't know if it's in our American DNA to find a cheap technological solution out there. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's something out there, and it's all relative. But in my experience on the IED thing is it was not inexpensive, and frankly there weren't a lot of limits put on me to say, hey, solve this problem. We'll worry about the accounting later on here. As a taxpayer, that bothers me a little bit, but that's kind of the approach. You might be onto something here. So
I think we have time maybe for one more question. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, General. It seems like a time of significant geopolitical rivalry with countries like China, Russia, Iran, and though we fight conflicts against smaller threats like ISIS or the Taliban, we sometimes come up against or become adjacent to those great powers, and they seem to sometimes be not reluctant to try out some new technologies to disrupt our war efforts. I saw this firsthand in Operation Inherent Resolve. I just wondered, as a practitioner, as a combatant commander, what do you think is the best response to such attempts, and what do you think what policies do you think would you wish to be equipped with?
I think so. Your question is how we deal with kind of the innovation of the enemy on the battlefield.
Yeah, or not even the enemy, but like great powers that are trying innovative new technologies and using them against us, even though we're not in conflict with them.
Well, I actually, as a SOCON commander, we spent a lot of time thinking through this, what I kind of characterize as this gray zone conflict here, where we are, it's more than normal, economic, commercial competition out there, but it's less than war. And it's an area in which we find ourselves in a variety of areas. And I think, I think the thing that in my view is most important in this area is preserving our relationships and making sure that the list of our partners is always bigger than the list of China's partners or Russia's partners or Iran's partners or North Korea's partners. This is incredibly important. And I just speak in the area, that I just left here, CENTCOM, as I traveled around to all those the countries, particularly the partner countries. They want to be aligned with us. They want to have our equipment. They want what we have. There's been a growth. Admiral McCraven used to always talk about the global soft network. This investment that we made in our own special operations people paid attention to that, and they have tried to emulate that. That's good, and that isn't about a snazzy box or something here. This is about just modeling ourselves and being accessible to people and being good partners with this. And so I think as we continue to confront great power competition, I think the thing we really have to guard against is preserving our influence out there and being seen as good partners, being seen as the good guys in this thing, and keeping our column bigger than everybody else's in terms of this. And I think with that comes a lot of moral authority, and comes a lot of ability to preserve our interests. And I think that's from my perspective, I think that's the most important thing that we do out there on a day-to-day basis. And frankly, it doesn't require tens of thousands of troops either. It's really interesting. In Iraq, when we left in 2011, one of the things we did do is we kept two 12-man ODAs on the ground from 2011 till when we went back in 2014. And they worked specifically with the counterterrorism service right there, maintain that relationship. We helped develop that organization. We stayed with them. This is 24 people. That's it. And as we orchestrated the campaign against ISIS in Iraq, the organization that led throughout the entire liberation was the CTS, the counterterrorism service, that element that we had stayed with. Because just that little investment right there made that much of a difference in that organization, that while the Iraqi army turned around and left and required all these other Shia and other groups to kind of come together, this organization held together. That to me is proof positive of the value of sticking with our partners. And it doesn't take a huge investment. It just takes being with them and continue to model with them and continue to be the great partners that we know we can be. I think that is the number one thing we can do in the gray zone from a military standpoint.
General, your service to the country has been extraordinary. Your moral compass and your clarity of leadership has done such a great service for all of us and encourages us here at CERL. So I just want to thank you for spending the time with us. And
Thanks.
We'll continue over cocktails and appetizers, and I hope that the audience will join us for that. And please now join me in thanking General Votel.